The council chamber stood like a temple of power, a vast hall filled with representatives from every corner of the galaxy. Hundreds of species, each one stranger and more ancient than the next, gathered under one roof. Their towering frames, glittering scales, and luminescent skin flickered under the dim blue lights that bathed the room. The walls were adorned with holographic banners of countless civilizations, each marking their presence in the galaxy for eons. This was the beating heart of the Intergalactic Council, an institution that had overseen millennia of peace and war with meticulous precision. For every conflict, there was a solution; for every battle, a treaty waiting to be signed. The Council's protocols were sacred, honed over centuries of diplomacy. When a war broke out, it followed a predictable pattern: engage, assess, negotiate, surrender. Even the most violent species in the galaxy eventually submitted to these rules. It was the way things worked, until now. Humanity. The newest race to join the Council. A species so young, they were barely a blip on the galactic timeline. Inexperienced, untested, and weak, the other members had initially dismissed them as inconsequential. When humanity stumbled into the stars, many believed they'd be little more than footnotes in the galaxy's history. They had joined the Council only a few decades ago, quickly learning the protocols but never truly understanding their weight. And now, in their first real test, humans had thrown the entire system into chaos. The war had started like any other, an altercation between humanity and the Croddock, a powerful, centuries-old empire. The Croddock were an apex predator in the galactic hierarchy, feared for their brutal efficiency in war. Humanity's defeat was inevitable, or so the Council thought. They'd assumed humans would fight valiantly for a time, then accept their losses and follow the standard protocol: surrender before total annihilation. But that's where things took a strange turn. The humans didn't respond to the Council's carefully crafted surrender protocols. No formal communication. No white flags. Just silence. The Croddock, frustrated by the lack of acknowledgement, pressed harder, obliterating human outposts and colonies with ruthless precision. Still, the humans fought back. Their forces were diminishing rapidly, but instead of retreating, they advanced. Instead of negotiating, they doubled down. The Council watched in disbelief as reports of human resistance continued to flood in. By all accounts, humanity should have surrendered days ago. But they hadn't. The Council grew concerned. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in the chamber, their faces a mix of confusion and disbelief. The Vetrax, a species of towering insectoids known for their impeccable logic, spoke first. "It is illogical. Their forces are diminished by over 70%. Their infrastructure is in ruins. Why have they not surrendered?" A murmur rippled through the chamber. No one had an answer. The humans had received the surrender protocols. Of that, there was no doubt. The Council had confirmed the messages were delivered, but humanity's silence remained deafening. A Zari diplomat, her skin shimmering with bioluminescence, leaned forward, her voice filled with irritation. "Perhaps they believe they can still win. A delusion, obviously. Their technology is no match for the Croddock." Another representative, from the Tyluk race, clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "Or perhaps they've misunderstood the protocols. They are a primitive race, after all. Maybe they think surrender is a sign of dishonor?" The Council members exchanged uneasy glances. They had dealt with countless species, from warrior civilizations to peaceful agrarians, and yet none had ever ignored the protocols like this. Every species had its own quirks, its own customs, but surrender was universal. When you were beaten, you laid down your arms. That's how it had always been. The Council leader, a massive being whose translucent form shimmered with ancient wisdom, addressed the room. "We must consider the possibility that humanity does not intend to surrender. We have sent multiple communications. Still, they fight. We must understand why." The room fell silent as the weight of the leader's words settled in. If humanity refused to follow the rules, it threatened the very foundation of galactic order. This wasn't just about one species. It was about the integrity of the Council's authority. A small, defiant race could unravel centuries of carefully constructed peace. Just then, an aide entered the chamber, their face pale with shock. The room shifted as all eyes turned toward them. "A new report has just arrived from the front lines," the aides said, their voice trembling. "Despite catastrophic losses, the humans have launched a counter-offensive. Their fleets, they're pushing into Croddock territory." Gasps of disbelief echoed through the hall. That was impossible. How could humanity, on the verge of destruction, muster the strength to attack? This wasn't how wars were fought. It wasn't logical. The Vetrax diplomat shook his head, his wings fluttering in agitation. "This is madness. They should be suing for peace, not escalating the conflict." The Zari representative narrowed her eyes. "Are they hoping for a last-minute victory? Surely, they can't believe they can win." The council leader raised a hand to silence the growing murmurs. "Enough. We must find out what drives them. This defiance cannot continue unchecked. If they will not follow the protocols, then we must decide how to respond." For the first time in the council's history, they faced a race that refused to submit to the order of things. A race that didn't seem to comprehend surrender, not because they didn't understand the rules, but because they simply didn't have a place for it in their culture. As the council members deliberated, one question loomed over them all: what kind of species chooses to fight to the last, even when all hope is lost? The meeting adjourned with no clear resolution. Outside, the stars flickered in the void, oblivious to the chaos unfolding within the chamber. Somewhere, far away, humanity continued its relentless push, refusing to yield. The council, for the first time in its long history, was left without an answer. The council was in turmoil. Confusion gripped the chamber as representatives debated and speculated over humanity's bizarre actions. Some were baffled, their minds struggling to comprehend what could drive an entire species to reject the council's sacred surrender protocols. Others viewed it as an act of sheer madness, a suicidal defiance against inevitable defeat. Frustration mounted with each passing moment, especially among those who had fought countless wars and followed the same rules for generations. But there were also murmurs of respect growing quietly among a few. They watched in awe as the reports poured in. Humanity, outgunned and outmatched, still refused to bow. Even in the face of total obliteration, they continued to fight. Some in the chamber began to admire this reckless bravery, though they would never admit it out loud. Could it be courage, not insanity, that drove them? The council decided it was time for answers. A special envoy, an alien ambassador known for his diplomatic prowess, was sent to communicate directly with humanity's military leadership. The council needed to understand why humans refused to do what every other species had done before: lay down their arms and negotiate for survival. The envoy's journey to meet the humans was brief, but his mission was critical. Upon arriving, he found a species unlike any he had encountered. Humanity was far from broken. Their leaders, though clearly aware of the overwhelming force against them, were defiant, even calm. The ambassador asked the burning question directly. "Why do you continue to fight? You cannot win. Surrender is the only logical option." The human admiral, a battle-hardened figure with scars that told their own stories, responded without hesitation. "Surrender? We don't have a protocol for that." The ambassador blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. "You don't have a surrender protocol?" "No," the admiral replied, his voice firm. "We have protocols for retreat when necessary. We have protocols for victory. And when there's no retreat and no victory, we fight until there's nothing left. Surrender isn't an option." The ambassador was stunned. Every species in the galaxy understood that survival was paramount, even at the cost of submission. To surrender was not weakness, it was simply the logical choice when all hope was lost. Yet here stood a species that didn't see it that way at all. To them, surrender wasn't just undesirable, it was unthinkable. As the ambassador pressed for answers, the human leaders began to reveal the core of their mindset. For humans, survival had never been easy. They had clawed their way through centuries of war, famine, disease, and natural disasters. Every step of their history had been a battle, and surrendering had never been part of their cultural lexicon. They didn't just survive, they fought for survival with a tenacity that baffled outsiders. It was embedded deep within their species, a refusal to bow, no matter the odds. One of the human commanders, a younger officer who had seen battles that would have broken most seasoned veterans, added her perspective. We come from a place where giving up isn't an option. Our history is full of impossible fights, wars where defeat seemed inevitable. But we survived because we refused to stop fighting. The ambassador listened, trying to process what he was hearing. He thought back to the council chamber, where surrender had always been viewed as a rational decision, one that saved countless lives in the long term. But here, among humans, the concept of surrender was almost foreign, an insult to their very nature. They fought, not out of arrogance, but out of an unshakable belief that as long as they drew breath, there was still a chance. They had no precedent for giving in, and that was why the council couldn't understand them. Back in the council chamber, frustration was mounting. The ambassador's report left more questions than answers. The leaders of countless civilizations couldn't fathom a species that refused to play by the rules. One representative voiced the thought on many minds. It's irrational. Their casualties are catastrophic. If they don't surrender, they'll be wiped out. Others agreed, pressing for action. If humanity wouldn't surrender voluntarily, should the council intervene and force them to follow protocol? Or worse, should they simply leave the humans to their fate, a cautionary tale about the consequences of defiance? Yet, despite the growing calls for action, there was also a reluctant admiration spreading through the room. Some representatives, though still confused by humanity's stubbornness, began to wonder if perhaps there was something to be learned from them. They had faced annihilation, and instead of choosing the path of least resistance, they chose to stand their ground. The council, torn between their protocols and the growing respect for humanity's resilience, decided on a final attempt to bring the humans to reason. A direct message was sent, a final warning. The council demanded an explanation for humanity's refusal to surrender and offered one last opportunity for peace. This was not just about preserving the humans anymore. The integrity of the council's authority was at stake. Humanity's response was simple, direct, final. We don't surrender. There was no elaboration, no justification, just a stark reminder that humanity didn't operate by the same rules. Their message carried with it a weight that no one in the council chamber had expected. They weren't being obstinate or defiant out of pride. To them, surrender simply didn't exist as an option. It was a foreign concept, not because they didn't understand the words, but because it wasn't in their nature to accept defeat. For humanity, there were only two paths, victory or death. The chamber fell into silence as the message was read aloud. The alien council members were stunned. They had never encountered a species that didn't have a formal surrender protocol. To the council, surrender was part of survival, a way to live to fight another day. But to humanity, survival meant fighting with everything they had, until the very end. The council was left with a profound realization. Humans were not like other species. They were something entirely different, a species that didn't bend, didn't break, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Humanity stood on the brink of annihilation. The Croddock forces closed in from all sides, their overwhelming fleets forming an impenetrable barrier around the last human stronghold. The council observed the unfolding battle, fully expecting this to be the final chapter of the human race. They had no doubt that humanity's last remnants would be crushed under the relentless advance of a superior force. The galaxy was about to witness the end of a species that had refused to follow the most basic of galactic customs, surrender. In the command room, human leaders gathered for what could very well be their final moments. Despite the odds, their faces were hard with resolve. It wasn't the first time humanity had faced impossible odds. As the reports of Croddock forces breaching their defenses came in, the human general, a seasoned warrior with decades of combat experience, addressed his commanders. "This isn't the first time we've stood on the edge of oblivion," he said. "Our ancestors stood at Thermopylae, outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Our forefathers stared down the barrel in wars that should have wiped us out. And we're still here." A younger officer, battered but determined, added, "We don't fight because we think we can win. We fight because it's who we are." The admiral, the heart of humanity's defense, nodded grimly. If we're going down, we're taking them with us. Every last one. What came next was nothing short of astounding. Against all tactical logic, humanity launched a desperate counterattack. Their forces, though decimated, surged forward with reckless abandon. They moved with a ferocity and cunning that stunned the Croddock, who had assumed the humans were on the verge of collapse. But humanity wasn't collapsing, they were doubling down, striking with a precision that came from desperation and resolve. In the council chamber, murmurs of disbelief rippled through the room as live feeds of the battle played out. Alien representatives watched as human ships, smaller and fewer in number, outmaneuvered Croddock fleets in ways no one had anticipated. The Croddock commanders, overconfident and expecting an easy victory, were caught off guard. What was supposed to be humanity's last stand turned into a brutal fight for every inch of space, with the humans refusing to let go of even a single system. The Council's frustration began to turn into something else, curiosity, even admiration. A few members who had once argued for humanity's destruction began to see them in a new light. What kind of species could fight like this, when all logic demanded surrender? Representatives from previously disinterested races leaned forward in their seats, watching closely. Then, quietly, a few of the more sympathetic species began to question the Council's protocols. If humanity could fight like this, was it really fair to judge them by the same standards as every other race? Could it be that the Council's rigid rules weren't equipped to handle a species like humanity, one that didn't think in terms of retreat, one that refused to accept defeat? For the first time, the Council's authority over the concept of surrender was being questioned. Behind closed doors, a few members of the Council began to offer covert support to humanity. They didn't provide fleets or direct assistance, but they subtly diverted supplies and shared intelligence. It wasn't about breaking the Council's rules, it was about recognizing that humanity had earned something far more valuable than victory. They had earned respect. The debates within the Council grew heated. Some argued that humanity's defiance should be punished, that they were a destabilizing force that threatened the delicate balance of power in the galaxy. Others, however, saw something in the humans that they hadn't seen in any other species, a refusal to conform, yes, but also a refusal to back down. To them, humanity was not a threat but a species with a rare and invaluable quality, the ability to defy expectations. One of the Croddock's own allies, a previously staunch supporter of the Council's protocols, stood up during a heated session. "You call it madness," they said, "but what I see is courage. The kind of courage that wins wars, not just on battlefields, but in hearts and minds. Perhaps we've misjudged them." The tipping point came when the Croddock, frustrated by humanity's relentless defiance, made a critical mistake. They overextended their forces, assuming that victory was within their grasp. But humanity had anticipated this. Using every ounce of their remaining resources, they launched a decisive strike, cutting through the Croddock lines in a way that no one had expected. The Croddock, for the first time, faltered. Though the battle was far from a victory, it wasn't a loss either. Humanity, battered and bruised, had survived. The Croddock were forced to pull back, licking their wounds, while humanity regrouped. In the aftermath, the Council convened once again, but this time, their tone had changed. The humans had proven something that no other species had. They didn't just fight for survival, they fought because surrender was not in their nature. The Council, humbled by this revelation, issued a formal statement. It was a rare admission, but one that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of warfare and diplomacy. "Humanity," the statement read, "is a unique species, one that does not adhere to the traditional customs of galactic warfare. Their refusal to surrender is not a defiance of logic, but an expression of their deepest nature. It is with this understanding that the Intergalactic Council recognizes humanity as a force unlike any other, and one that must be respected." In the days that followed, the humans began to rebuild. They were far from victorious, but they were alive. Their leaders, scarred from the conflict, gathered once again, not to discuss the losses, but to plan their next steps. For humanity, the war wasn't over. They had survived the impossible, and now, they prepared for the future. And in the halls of the council, where once they were seen as an anomaly, humanity was now spoken of in tones of quiet respect. They had defied not only the Craddock but the very fabric of galactic tradition. They had shown the galaxy that they would not bend, not because of arrogance or ignorance, but because, for humans, surrender had never been an option. The galaxy would never look at them the same way again.